we might anticipate. I do believe that it's been an opportunity for certain technologies to leap forward, and I don't think that that ground will be lost. I'm not seeing real evidence of a backlog happening. It feels like everything's on a pause. And if everything's on a pause, then when we start up, it likely is there certainly will be spots of it. Bankruptcy is going to surge, things like that. But having said that, if this crisis continues for a long time, if we're looking at not having a vaccine until mid 2021, and we're dealing with this to the end of 2021 or into 2022, then I think that's very hard to predict. I think that we are looking at, again, technology changes having an impact on this, rule changes and law changes having an impact. But I think then we're facing starting to understand the psychological impact on this on a generation of people. And then we have to deal with questions, in my specific case, about things like, how long is it really going to be before a court is willing to bring in 120 people for jury selection and put them into a jury box? I don't know the answer to that yet. And there's good discussion going on around that. So my crystal ball basically is, if we clear this up quickly, which I don't think we will, it will probably have minimal impact other than some technologies leaping forward. If it drags on, we need to have this conversation again in November. And I think it'll be a very different conversation.
Tony, what's your crystal ball telling you? Lasting impact on the industry?
Yeah, lasting impact is, in conversations with clients, there's two schools of thought of it. One is what I call, we're going to go back to normal conversation. Attorneys will continue to want to do depositions as they've done. Courts will open up. There's another school of thought that I'm hearing for customers, which is it's a new normal. I think I'm more in line with what I'm hearing to the new normal. And I just want to reflect that with two questions that actually a customer brought up with me. Even if courts open, and they're going to have to open in a very cautious way, there are procedures being put out now by the U.S. Court Administrative Office on how they're going to do that. What happens if a deponent or a witness is not willing to go back in a room regardless of their state or court opening? And what about an at-risk population that's suddenly larger than it's been before? How do we handle them? So I think looking at that at a bigger societal level, there's going to be lasting change. There's going to be more adoption of technology procedures. We're going to head somewhere back to a new normal than going back to what we've done before.
Okay. Billy, same question. Crystal ball, lasting impact on the industry.
So I like the crystal ball question, so I'm willing to put myself out there a bit. I think this is going to have profound, or COVID that is going to have profound changes on our industry. First and foremost, any court reporting firm or service provider that has not adopted or taken into or implemented new technology or being able to support it, I think they're going to get left behind. I think that lost market share is gone for them forever because I think location is going to be a secondary condition when our clients are scheduling depositions. Similar to firms that carry lots of debt, there was a lot of free money out there pre-COVID, and a lot of firms took on substantial debt, and I think those firms are suffering now and are going to continue to suffer through this COVID pandemic. And then third, I think these law firms are adopting this technology, and so I think we're going to see more and more firms requesting it, some of them even requiring it. Tony raised an excellent point that you can have all the states you want open up and ease restrictions, right? But if I have a witness who says, I'm not going around other people to take my deposition, or if I have a stenographer that says, I don't feel safe being around other people, I'm not going to put him or her into harm's way, right? I have to protect our employees. I have to protect our independent contractors. And so those firms that haven't adopted the technology are going to get left behind. And I think a result of that will be further consolidation in the court reporting provider space because of it.
Interesting. Okay, next slide. And Bill, you're going to be on the hot seat again. We'll Well, what variety of legal proceedings, length, type of litigation, type of client, whatever else, are best or worst suited to being conducted remotely?
So every single one of them, we have done all of them, and whether it's a mediation, deposition, hearing, a trial, or anything in between, we have done each of them remotely, and they're all well suited to be conducted remotely. I think the key is having buy-in from the attorneys or from your clients, right? So it's incumbent upon us to educate them about the technology, give them demos, make sure that they know what our security protocols are and how they're in place, and how our stenographers are keeping their data secured. And that is going to be the key to making these proceedings accepted and part of the new normal. So, number one is the attorney buy-in. And I think that's coming, because I can just tell you, over the last 4 weeks, we've given at Planet Depots over 200 webinars to attorneys and their support staff. So over 2,000, 3,000 people have already seen remote capabilities. And I can tell you the response from most of them has been, why didn't I do this sooner? Why was I traveling from Boston to San Francisco for a one-day deposition? That doesn't make any sense. The amount of expense to my clients and my lost time to go do that, it's not worth it. Now I can see it. I can do it right through Zoom or through WebEx or through any of these platforms, and it's a piece of cake, and I'm home in time for dinner. So I just think the buy-in from the client is key.
Steve, same question. Best or worst suited from your to remote from your perspective?
So I think up to a point, I would agree with Billy that virtually all of them can be adapted to remote. There are certainly differences between relatively simple matters with a few participants versus proceedings with a judge that have multiple participants, criminal arraignments where they're going through multiple cases at one time. There's logistical differences between purely oral arguments or discussions versus handling exhibits within the court environment. All of those can be resolved. They're simply procedural, and there are technical solutions available to it. The one, again, that we are talking about now, and we're not seeing a good answer to, are jury trials. Jury trials present really challenging questions to be done remotely. Again, not so much technically. Some that can be done technically, and I think there's a really good argument that some of this should be done remotely or via video and via recording. But we are confronted with the constitutional question of people having a right to a jury by their peers. I think you probably will see the virtual elimination of civil jury trials during this age. It's just going to be very difficult to do. And I don't think any of the participants are going to be willing to delay long enough to figure out how to do it. But on criminal matters where jury trials are a constitutional right that you have, I'm not sure where that's going. And the way it currently is structured, I'm not seeing good remote recording solutions.
I think we're all feeling what sequestration would feel like if you're on a jury right now.
Yeah.
If we can move to the next slide. And what you'll see here is just the states that have made some type of accommodation, and at least that I was able to get my hands on from by yesterday, and I thank Lexitas for making that resource available. But these are the states that have made some level of accommodation to enable remote proceedings. So that leads into my next question. You can go to the next slide, which is on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being shocked. How surprised are you of states' willingness to change their notary laws and otherwise accommodate remote proceedings? And what other changes and accommodations do you think are necessary? And we're going to start with you, Steve.
I don't think any of that has surprised me. Again, I think that when I said that people are responding rationally, that includes judges and Supreme Courts who are passing these rules. Everybody quickly realized the urgency of the matter. when you talk about things like notary laws, and there are a number of other laws that would fall into this category, I think people understood that some of these needed to be addressed anyway, and they were just ignored because there was no urgency to it. So now what we've got are a lot of emergency rulings or waivers of rules or laws that we see across the country. And I'm not surprised at all that they did that. Some of those will roll back as we come out of this, but I think we're also looking at a number of them becoming permanent changes. And I think that's probably a good thing.
Billy.
Okay.
So on a scale of 1 to 10, I give it a 1, being that I wasn't surprised at all. It was very evident to me that the rules needed to be relaxed and changed for legal proceedings to move forward. Again, having any sort of limitations on administering the oath, for example, is a delay in the legal process. So again, I don't think our clients want that for their clients, and they needed to be changed. And it's unfortunate it took a pandemic for states to realize that their notary laws were outdated. But no, I wasn't surprised at all because they were archaic.
Yeah.
All right, next slide, please. And now we're going to get to workforce, but how are your people adjusting to the reality? What's proving to be most difficult for reporters and others to navigate with remote proceedings? And Tony, this time we'll start with you.
Okay. Well, from Burbert's perspective, obviously we were very adapted to go to remote. From what I'm hearing from our customers, we've had some customers that were more prepared to go to remote, others that had to act quickly, but most of them are operating remote, and they're coping well.
Billy, thinking about your people, your reporters, how are they reacting?
They have been great. I mean, I have to say that the stenographers have really stood up and tackled this head on. They adjusted immediately and early with us, and we required it. So, I mean, once we got wind in Asia with our practice that this was affecting our business, we brought it stateside immediately, and we got all of our court reporters on trainings, on webinars, updating their security equipment, getting new pieces of software or hardware for them, educating our clients. So from our team, I've been super impressed, not only from our court reporters, but also the PD staff. We are all working remotely, and it's just been such a great group effort to really make it happen for our clients.
Okay. All right. If we can move to the next slide, please. And this, I think, is a cartoon that just gets to the point that Billy made earlier. It says, my God, those meetings really could have been done by email. And that, if you can move to the next slide, it's possible that some attorneys and judges will more regularly ask, and we've talked about this a little bit, but let's get into it more, ask, why can't we do this remotely? How can the industry prepare for this? And we're going to go to Steve on this one to start.
So again, I think it is important to make the distinction between the court market and the freelance market here. I would also agree that the courts generally have done a great job of stepping up and doing what needs to be done. But I think we need to acknowledge that all of us are kind of in this, I don't want to call it a honeymoon period, but this period where everybody understands why we have to do this right now. So people are tolerant of things not necessarily going as smoothly as they should sometimes, because they know this has to be done. That will last for a certain amount of time, but certainly as we come out of this crisis, if we want or we expect attorneys and judges to believe that this is a viable method for them to conduct their business going forward, then during this time, we better figure out how to get it right. And getting it right means bringing a very professional approach to it, dealing with the technical issues, dealing with the logistical issues, dealing with the security issues. There's just a whole range of things that are being not overlooked right now. I don't mean to say that, but when there's a failure, it's being accepted. That's not going to happen. So the one thing that we can do to prepare the industry going forward is to figure out how to do this right. And that's going to be slightly different in the different settings. There will be specialists to do different types of remote hearings, I suspect. But that's going to be the key. I think there is a better chance that judges and attorneys come out of this feeling positive about the experience, but there is a very real risk that they come out of this feeling negative about it and simply want to go back to in-person proceedings as much as possible. So it's our responsibility to making sure it falls
Tony.
right.
Steve? Oh, I'm sorry. Jim, did you call me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Tony. Same question.
Great. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, there was a little break there in the audio. I just wanted to point out a few examples of, are they going to ask why we can't do this remotely? I know for a fact they're already asking this. Perhaps it's not as broad as we would like, particularly on the technology side. And how are they preparing for it? At least they're starting to think about it and test it for those who already don't use it. However, I think if you just do a quick Google search, you'll find numerous examples of how courts themselves and even some law firms have moved forward remote. I'm going to point out three particular instances: Florida, 11th Circuit Court,
Okay.
criminal and less, Texas, and California. I'm sorry, Jim, I think the audio broke again.
Yeah, it's bleeping a little bit.
Okay, so there are numerous examples, just to conclude, there are numerous examples up there of at least how the courts have been moving forward, and that continues to grow.
Okay. Billy, I know you had some pretty strong opinions on this, so I'll let you answer this one you touched on earlier.
Sure. Yeah, I think both Tony and Steve are spot on. I'll start with Tony's point first. They can, and they already are asking to conduct remotely. But I think Steve is right that the caveat to that is that it needs to be done well, right? So if they're going to take a chance and use our company to conduct a remote deposition, it better be done to the perfect way, because they want, and that means from the technology running smoothly to the stenographer knowing how to enter the room and take the deposition, to our technician to everyone being up to speed on security and making sure the documents and the exhibits are all handled in a secure fashion. So I think if done well, they are going to be asking for it all the time. Now, do I think that's going to be for 100% of the depositions? No, certainly not. Some attorneys may never go back to in-person. I think that will be the minority. But I think a lot of people, what we're going to see is more of a hybrid approach. We're going to see that remote depositions are not for every witness. Maybe if you have an extremely important witness that you want to be in person with, then certainly remote might be an option. But for a lot of the times it will be. So I think we'll see a hybrid approach from most. And so it's just going to become part of, as we've said numerous times today, the new normal in the litigation process.
Great. All right, next slide, please. What is something that clients or firms are not thinking about, reporting firms that is, but needs their attention? And let's go to Billy on this one first.
Yeah, I think it all goes back to the acceptance of technology. I think a lot of reporting firms are not thinking about that. Again, if you are not implementing tech into your business full steam ahead, you are going to be left behind. I mean, that's just the fact. I mean, you can look at every other industry outside of court reporting, whether it's Uber and the taxi cab drivers, hotel chains and Airbnb. I mean, those that didn't embrace technology and didn't embrace it quickly and at the beginning are going to be left behind. So that's first and foremost. I think, there has to, I can't really stress that enough. And so the more you're focusing on tech and what's out there and making your firm tech enabled and eventually technology based, you're not going to have a chance to compete in the coming years.
Steve,
I think
what do people need to be thinking about?
Once again, I think that everybody needs to consider the possibilities of how long this is going to last, because I think the decisions that reporting firms and courts need to be thinking about will change over time. If you're a reporting firm, it may be that your urgent need right now is simply surviving this, right? Are you seeking the financial aid that you need through PPP programs or whatever it is? As you come out of that, I think Billy is right. You're going to have to take a technological approach to this. But I also believe that people need to start considering the procedural or just kind of the human aspect of what is happening here. The transition to remote opens a lot of questions about how behavior should be modified. If people, including reporters, judges, attorneys, approach this new world with technology, assuming that they can behave exactly the way they behaved when they were in the courtroom or live in the deposition room, you're going to see some spectacular faux pas. People need to understand the ramifications of recording and remote recording, where you are not in the room seeing what's happening with that individual or two people. So I think that one of the things both courts and reporting firms need to think about is how attorneys, judges, all of these participants, witnesses, we need to understand how the changes in their behavior are going to affect what we're doing and how we might be able to influence or educate them in a positive way as to how they should change or what they should be thinking about when they're participating in one of these events versus what this attorney may have been doing for the last 30 years, doing depositions in a deposition room. It's different.
I'm going to come to Billy just for a quick follow-up question that somebody submitted. But will there be some lost intimidation factor that some attorneys won't like by doing remote?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there definitely will be, although the attorneys that I know have adopted and done a great job with bringing that factor right back into the virtual deposition room, as I call it. And so, and I see some of these other questions coming up about coaching witnesses, so it kind of dovetails into my point. They're having the witness multiple cameras on the witness so they can see what's going on in the room, who's in the room, and they're putting a lot of things on the record. So, Jim, if you were the witness for the day and I was the noting attorney, I would say to you, Jim, have you received any text messages during the course of this deposition? And then you would answer, Jim, is there anything on the table in front of you that are helping you answer any of these questions? Jim, is there anyone else in the room with you today? All these questions are now under oath on the deposition record. And so to your intimidation point, it gets them on that footing that, hey, I'm watching you. And it really puts them in a position of power, which they like to be in when they're the noticing attorney, when they call the witness out and say, hey, I'm going to put this on the record under oath. And it helps with that intimidation factor quite a bit.
Okay. All right. Next slide, please. So this is just an illustration from a tipping point, a study that we did and published in the fall about what's going to happen to the number of stenographers over the next 8 years now. But effectively, what's going to happen is the workforce is going to, between now and 2028, is going to lose 10,000 or more stenographers. So this is happening, in parallel to this crisis, of course. If you can go to the next slide, it leads us into the next question that I'd like each of you to answer. So do you expect the impact of COVID-19 to accelerate or otherwise have an impact on the integration of digital voice and ASR into the market? And I'll start with you, Tony, this time.
Thank you. Regarding acceleration, I think it's already accelerating it. And from a technology perspective, and we're a technology company, acceleration is key. I was trying to refer to some previous examples in different states, how the courts are adapting and what we're hearing from our clients and their customers. So, you're starting to see acceleration, you'll start seeing adoption, and I think you're going to definitely see an increase in the learning curve. As for the technology, the integration is here today. This is nothing new, and it's getting even better. Very simple. Zoom is a proven technology. There's integrations with Zoom with other types of solutions out there. ASR in the market, why not use ASR with Live? It's already been done as an augmentation to it. So the technologies are there. And I think for the foreseeable future, at least for 12 to 18 months, as Billy said, we'll see some type of hybrid remote model. So the acceleration is there. That's going to increase the learning curve. That's going to increase the higher adoption. And I think you're going to have many firms, agencies, courts, and even everyday businesses are going to have to start reimagining what their businesses look like in this post-pandemic world, the pre-virus world. And that can be 12 to 24 months off. So I definitely see much more acceleration coming.
Billy, what's this going to do to the integration and the shortage, or impact that the shortage might have on this?
So the shortage of stenographers is going to be there once COVID is all done with, just like it was here but pre-COVID, right? So that's not going anywhere for all the reasons we already know, and we don't have to repeat them here today. So that shortage is going to be there, and it's going to be just as impactful as ever. I think where COVID might help, at least for the short term, in terms of the stenographic shortage, is the acceptance of remote deposition. So where notary laws permit, we can have reporters from different states covering in other states. Okay, and so obviously if we're out of stenographers in a certain state, but we have some in a different state and it's a remote deposition, then we can cover it with a stenographer. So I think in the short term that helps alleviate some of the pressures that we've been facing. But again, the overall long-term picture is just as your last slide showed, that those numbers are going to continue to decrease at a rapid pace, and there's really no stopping it at this point.
Steve.
I would agree that
mute.
Yeah, the long-term trends are the long-term trends, and COVID might accelerate that slightly by people being prompted to retire or something like that, but I don't think it's a relevant trend. I think the more relevant question, part of this question, has to do with the adoption of technology through the crisis. I think that crises like these always provide an opportunity for technology to have accelerated adoption. That is important. Anytime we can digitally enable services, it tends to take fairly large steps forward, and this is an opportunity to do that. There are some unique characteristics about this one that are interesting to look at right now. Remote hearings tend to be far more conducive to ASR than open microphone recording. So we actually end up with a result where you're getting much better ASR out of remote hearings than you would out of an open microphone recording in a deposition, and certainly in a courtroom. Once again, I would say, however, you have to let this play out. There are some things we expect right now, and there are going to be some surprises as this whole crisis unfolds. I mean, if you're a Bob Dylan fan, don't speak too soon. The wheel's still a spin. And so again, let's have this conversation again in November and see where this adoption and where the players are on each of these points.
Oh, I'd almost want to end right there on the whole webinar if we can finish up with Bob Dylan. But instead, let's take some questions that have been submitted. If we can move to the next slide, and I know the panelists can see the questions. So if there's any that you want to jump into, go ahead. But I'll start, and rather than pick on you individually, whoever has answers, let's try not to talk over each other. But I'll ask the question and jump in if you have an answer. What procedures are you using for video recording depositions? And somebody else asked, I'll move them together. Do you see a world where the video that capabilities are going to, of Zoom or other platforms, are going to negate the need for a legal videographer?
So yeah, I can jump in on that one. It's a great question. It really is the client preference. So yes, you are correct that some platforms like Zoom can record the virtual deposition proceeding. But a lot of our clients are still booking videographers. And so again, the videographer will also be remote. No one's in person now with everything going on. So the videographer can pin the witness and film the witness right with their HD camera, right off of their laptop or computer screen at home. And so we're seeing that with a lot of clients. And some of our clients are saying that the recording of the Zoom meeting or the Zoom virtual deposition room is sufficient. So it's really what the client's preference is. I think that going forward, we will see videography pick back up because, again, at the time of trial, having that crisp, clean video record with a synchronized transcript and timestamped is important. But again, I think it will be hybrid. I don't think it's going to be one size fits all. It will be different for every client.
Anyone else want to address that one? Okay. Earlier we talked about, and Billy, you talked about specifically that if people were behind on tech, they might be behind the times and be in trouble. So my question is, if people wanted to leap forward on technology at this point, where should they focus their attention? And not just for Billy, whoever might want to answer that. So where can people focus their attention on technology if they were already behind?
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to eat up not talking too much, but I'll jump in again. So I think from that perspective, I think you have to jump all the way in the pool. And whether that's talking to companies that can secure your client's information, I think security is the number one big thing. From a tech perspective, I think every law firm, not only today, but in the future, is going to be asking what your security setup is and how is their data protected. And that means from when the stenographers have it on their computers to how that's transferred to Planet Depots and to other agencies, and then how it's transferred to the client. If you don't have a security protocol in place for managing your client's data, you're dead in the water in the next few years. So I think if I were to say one thing from a technology standpoint, start there. Engage some sort of company or hire a CISO or someone that can help manage your security and the data that you're maintaining for your clients.
Yeah, Tony, you could answer some of the security protocols if you wouldn't mind. I know that you have a background, in this area. So if firms are particularly concerned about security and what Billy just talked about, is there anything that you could recommend that they explore?
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. There was a bit of an audio interruption, so I missed some of that conversation on my side. Yeah, security is primary, particularly, for instance, with some of the recent articles that were posted about the Zoom situation that happened a few weeks ago. So there are particular settings, for example, on Zoom that you always want to have. They have waiting rooms now and using passwords. It's basic work like that. Securing data is vitally important. There's different protocols to use for that. For instance, our data is on Amazon. It's secured at a very high level of that. But there's also basic things in remote deposition, such as not exposing exhibits that you may not present early. How do you ensure that certain people don't see that? So there are technologies available for that. So there's broad-based options for that, and we can post further information on it as part of the response to this. We'll put an ebook together for this as well.
Steve, it looks like you had something to say.
It's simply to add on to what both Tony and and Billy have said that to jump into technology, that process really involves selecting the companies you want to, you believe can support you the way you need to be supported. So if you're a reporting firm, select a technology. If this is specifically for remote hearings, you need to make a decision about Zoom or WebEx or GoToMeeting, whichever technology you're going to, and then dive deeply into that technology. They're all different. They all have advantages and disadvantages. But this idea that I'm simply going to become digitally fluent in remote depositions doesn't quite work that way. You actually do need to select some vendors and work with those vendors. I think all of the vendors, Verbit's a good example. All of the vendors are happy to engage with you to help you through this process. It's not something you go through alone easily. So find the right people, find the right vendors, and work with them.
Okay. Explain how you're handling exhibits using Zoom or equivalent platforms.
So exhibits are handled quite easily right through Zoom. It's definitely the best platform to do that. And we do it in a few ways. You can do it through a simple screen share, just as Jim and Tony are doing today by sharing the presentation that you're looking at, the PowerPoint. So you can pull up exhibits that way so that everyone attending the remote deposition can see them. And then we can also share them through the chat or through a share file, like a Dropbox, to get them the actual electronic form of it as well. So, it's definitely the biggest question we get from our clients is how we handle exhibits. But once they see the demo, it's so easy to use. And I would posit that it's easier to pull up exhibits in a remote deposition setting than it is in person, because you don't have all those banker's boxes and trying to flip through to find things, worry about marking them in the deposition in-person room. You can just find it right off of your PC, pull it up just with the click of a button, and you're looking at the exhibit.
Jim, I think this is a great example of, if you think you're going to do it the way you did before, you're going to have problems. But if you learn and understand the process that's available to you in the digital environment, it actually can be a far more efficient process. It does require some preparation. It requires some understanding of how to use the tools and some support, but it can and is more efficient when done properly.
Okay. Somebody asked, where does federal and California stand on admissibility of remote depots and other proceedings? So if anybody has any particular insight on that one.
I don't have the laws. Obviously, every state is different. You feel free to reach out to me in terms of a state-by-state basis. I just don't have all the states memorized at this moment.
Yeah, and I would refer, I know Lexitas has that document that was in our newsletter and I referenced earlier with the map, even though the map was my own. Steve, any insight on this one?
And not really. Once again, I think any restrictions that were in place have, at least on an emergency basis, been lax, maybe not removed completely, but at least temporarily removed. So right now, to my knowledge, I'm sure there are some states that continue to have restrictions in place, but to my knowledge, most of the court systems around the country, the Supreme Courts have basically unrestricted the use of remote recordings, at least during this time, including California federal government.
All right, let me just do one more question from the audience, and then maybe if anybody has some parting words. But if the floodgates were suddenly to open and every client wants proceedings tomorrow, how will you triage? How will you handle that? And I'll start with you on that one, Steve.
I think as a company owner, I'm sure Billy would say the same thing. That's the kind of problem you'd love to have. You don't sleep for days, and you address the supply problems that you have and get with it. I would caution that, again, if there is this rush that comes from either a backlog that may or may not really be there, because that backlog may in fact just return to a normal flow, or because of a change in attitude regarding technology. Um, Going through technology adoption for several decades now, um, rushes are not unexpected. In other words, uh, clients move as a herd typically. You work and you work and you work, and then they move as a herd. Zoom would be a great example of that right now, where they fought for 10, 12 years to get where they got, and then the COVID crisis hits, and overnight they're a success. And all of a sudden, potential problems are exposed in their security designs and so on and so forth. It is possible that there is a herd movement coming out of COVID. Um, I'm not necessarily seeing that right now. Um, Again, let's have the conversation in November. I think we've made progress. I think that technology has leapfrogged certain steps in the adoption life cycle because of COVID, but we haven't gone into some mainstream market that's going to create a flood that overwhelms anybody. That's kind of where I am right now.
Tony or Billy, if the floodgates are open, triaging, how would you handle the onslaught?
I'm going to hi, it's Tony. I'm going to take a slightly different perspective than Steve. I actually think I wouldn't say it's a flood, but at some point you're going to have pent up demand. It's going to have to come back, and it's going to come back quickly. We've seen that in directions the administrator of the U.S. Courts has given in a recent memo to start preparing for an upsurge in filings. Now, that's filings, how many cases go through, how many cases will just be settled because they've been ongoing. But I do hear more from customers that there's going to be pent up demand at some point. And I think it's going to be, the longer this is, people are just going to start moving forward. So obviously, from my perspective and from a business perspective, the more you can reimagine, be flexible, and adapt to technology quicker, the better off you're going to be. And that's just the general way our economy is moving for the past 10 to 20 years. I mean, certainly there will be caution because of the necessities in the legal industry. So utilization of ASR technologies, looking at better ways to record audio so you get that better output, testing Zoom on a few lower complex cases will lead you to better handling remote depositions forward. And then fundamentally, again, I'm going to get back to what I said earlier. We have at least 14 months plus to a vaccination and to certain regions of the state, like particularly I'm in the New York metro area, which are ever going to get back to some sense of normalcy. Cases are just going to have to move forward. So I think those that can adopt quicker and are willing to reimagine their businesses are going to do better than others. And that's just coming from a technology company perspective, because that's the world we compete in all day.
Yeah, and then I think I fall right in between Tony and Steve, and I know we're coming up on our time here, so I'll be brief, but I think that there certainly is a backlog. I don't think the backlog will be as big as everyone is expecting, like there's going to be this huge flood, but there certainly is a backlog. And I think we've seen definitely upticks in mediations and cases settling over the last month, so that will calm some of the floodgates from being too intense. But again, I think technology has enabled us to cover depositions anywhere, right? So again, pertaining to specific notary laws, we can have reporters in different states covering proceedings. So at my firm, at Planet Depots, we don't turn down work. As Steve said, this is a good problem to have. The job will get covered and in one shape or fashion.
If I can make one last comment specific to what Billy's saying, I think that a number of the rule and law changes that we're looking at right now, like the notary laws, will actually enable companies to respond to more rapid growth much more easily. Billy's ability to respond nationally is enabled by some of these pretty significant rule changes, and I think that's important.
Okay. I just leave it on this slide for a sec. I just will finish up by once again thanking each of you for participating. I hope the people who are listening either to this live or later on the recorded version that we will distribute, that you got value out of this, that we hope that this was a timely discussion on obviously an issue that is front and center for everyone. But if you have other ideas for content, you see the email address on the screen, info@speech-to-text-institute.org. Love to hear from you. Love to get reaction to this webinar, how we can make it better, what we could be doing better. And then, of course, as I said, different types of content, and including, if somebody has something that they like to present, this is a format we would like to use more regularly to get information out into the market. So again, thank you to Verbit for hosting today. And thank you. I hope everybody stays safe. And I move to the next slide. I think it was already shown, but nonetheless, maybe put some context. I don't think it's weird, but straight across this today, the final words of optimism is that summer is coming. So at least in the Northern Hemisphere. Thank you again to everyone. And with that, we can to the final slide, and we will set you adrift for today. And again, thank you everybody.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, everybody.